All right, so now we talk about modern, contemporary Democrat and Republican parties. Today, they're actually quite a bit more decentralized than they used to be. Now, everything is a bit more local, and you have a very, very kind of loose, almost confederation of party organizations that meet to nominate their presidential candidates. Now, they all have, or they should say, they both have organizations at every level of government which can fundraise, recruit, and mobilize voters. Usually, in most democracies, what you would see is something like this: a very centralized political party, where a national party convention meets to draft a party platform and to nominate their candidates. And then they would coordinate with the National Party Committee, who in turn would also coordinate with congressional campaigns, state party offices, and then individual candidates. Today, it's more like this, and the organization is much, much messier. And this comes with its benefits and this comes with its drawbacks. One benefit is this is actually, if you think of democracy as creating as few obstacles as possible to getting any candidate nominated, that is the idea that anyone could become a candidate, this is more democratic, where this system might be very insulated and might only promote elites within this network. But this is messier and it comes with a risk that anyone could become a candidate. People are vetted a lot less now, and that's why you see so many political scandals that seem to just come out of nowhere. Now, here is another chart that kind of mirrors how things have traditionally gone. And what you see here is that the national level tends to coordinate with the state level, not as much with the county levels and the precinct levels. These organizations tend to be kind of autonomous, but they take their cues. They are connected to the national parties. And what I really want you to get from this is that both parties, Democrat and Republican, do have conventions, do have organizations at all levels of government. Now, people tend to not be actual card carrying members of any political party, though some do register their votes in specific ways so they can vote in party primaries. Now, that said, even though most people don't literally carry cards, party identification is quite strong, and the majority of Americans identify with one party or another. Now, you've heard a lot about the majority of Americans being independent. We're going to break down what that is. Now, this party identification really shows how likely a person is to vote, who they vote for, and what their priorities are. The party base, you hear this a lot. These are core supporters. These are people who will always vote Republican, will always vote Democrat, and the party can count on their votes, financial support, and help no matter who their candidates are. Now, really quick, let's take a breakdown of this. You see here that the majority of American voters right now identify either as Republican, or I'm sorry, as Democrat or Independents. We're going to break this down. This trend is continuing. There are fewer and fewer people identifying with the Republican Party, more and more independents. There's kind of a tapering off of people identifying as Democrats, but I will show you that that label of independent doesn't really mean what we think it means. Republican support today, and this is changing. This is changing, and I don't want to be somebody with a painting a broad stereotype. After all, I am a white Southerner. I am not a Republican. I am religious. I am not Republican. I'm also not a business person. But this is where the majority of the demographics break. The majority of Republicans tend to be white. Republicans and the Republican Party enjoys more support in the American South and greater support with religious identifying Americans, particularly Protestants, evangelicals. There's also business elites who identify with the Republican Party. Now, Democrats tend to have the majority support among minority groups. They tend to have the support of educated people, people who have a college degree or more, and they tend to be concentrated in the West Coast and the Northeast. Now, rallying the base. Rallying the base is when political parties and candidates will try and draw these supporters out. They will draw these supporters out to vote, and they do that by promising these voters things, by also another tactic that's been very effective is portraying the opposition as anti-American, as dangerous, as and kind of scaring their base is another tactic that is often used. Now, let's just take a look at some of this demographic. You see that the majority of male voters, slim majority, tend to lean Republican. The majority of women tend to lean Democrat. Now, the majority of white voters tend to be Republican, and the majority of black voters tend to be Democrat. The Hispanic vote got a lot of attention in Florida, but the majority still, to this day, tend to vote Democratic. Asians also tend to vote more Democratic than they do Republican. Now, a high school degree or less. Here's something really interesting to me is how close that vote is. So that predictor doesn't seem to be as meaningful anymore, nor does some college experience seem to be as meaningful as it used to be. Now, college graduation does seem to be meaningful. More college graduates tend to vote Democratic, and most postgrads, so that's your professors, that's me, tend to vote Democratic. Now, that said, nobody's trying to brainwash you. Stop yelling at me. Don't show up at a school board meeting to yell at me. I'm not trying to brainwash you. Millennials, that's my generation, tends to vote more Democratic than Republican. That divide is pretty sharp. Generation X, that's y'all, that divide does not seem to be as sharp. So everybody's watching you. What are you gonna do? How are you gonna vote? Please let us know. Give us a heads up. Baby boomers. This is starting to be really interesting too, is throughout most of my childhood, the majority of baby boomers tended to be more conservative. They still tend to be more conservative, particularly during the Obama presidency, and there seems to be something resembling a switch. Protestants and evangelicals, I told you, were majority Republican. Mainline Protestants, that's your General Methodist, your Baptist, etc., they tend to vote more Republican too. Um, Black non-Hispanic Protestants. So religion is not always the greatest identifier because minority voters within these religions tend to vote more Republican parties. Catholics, very close, but let's take a look when we de-aggregate that. White Catholics tend to vote more Republican. Hispanic Catholics tend to vote more Democrat. Mormons overwhelmingly tend to vote more Republican. American Jews tend to vote more Democrat, and no religious affiliations tend to vote more Democrat. Now, here I want to talk about this notion of the independent voter. Because, yes, the majority of Americans might be independent. However, most independents lean. They lean one way or the other. So let's take a look at this. More independents right now tend to lean Democrat than Republican. So that means that Republicans are eating up less of that independent share than they had in previous cycles. So really, there's not a lot of people who just don't identify with any political party. Most Americans identify with one political party more than the other, and they can't really be said to be independent in any meaningful way. Now, right now, we're at this really weird moment where political parties tend to be less bound up in platforms and more bound up in individuals. I think we can safely say, even if you are one of my students who just absolutely loves Donald Trump, I think even you would admit that the Republican Party seems to be concentrated around him, right? I mean, that's the evidence of our eyes and ears. And I would say that it's more concentrated around him than the Democratic Party is concentrated around Joe Biden. Now, these parties do tend to exist to help candidates. not the other way around. So is it the case now that individuals are dominating parties rather than ideas? Now, party conventions, again, they come together every 4 years to nominate a presidential candidate and to write that party's platform. That is its goal, that is its mission, that is its 4 year plan for the majority of voters, but nothing is binding. Now, here you see a photo of the Democratic convention from 2012. You had both the Democratic Party sending all sorts of people to participate in this process of nominating a candidate based off of the shares of votes that this person got in the election. Here you see the Republican National Convention in 1980. Or I'm sorry, 1900, excuse me. And you see, much has changed. Awful lot of orderly, just boring, just kind of standard procedure stuff going on here. Very strange imagery of somebody's face draped over the American flag. All sorts of weird stuff going on here. Now, national party committees are the fundraising arms of these organizations. They conduct business between conventions and they gather war chests. War chests are these huge piles of money that the party can give to candidates in order for candidates to buy ads, to mobilize voters, distribute pamphlets and information, etc., etc. These are the organizations responsible for mobilizing fundraising for political candidates at every level. Now, congressional campaign committees, they are independent from the national party. They tend to be aligned with individual congresspeople and help them get elected or reelected. State party organizations, they are separate organizations within each state, but they do send delegates to the party convention to nominate presidents. And then there's these associated interest or advocate groups. They are not technically part of a political party, but they're very close, and they try to push parties in ideological directions. These are your interest groups tied to political parties. Now, party ideologies. These are the beliefs that parties have at their core. These are a set of beliefs about how a good society should function. Now, the result is when this ideology is shared, there is a lot of internal unity. There's a lot of very clear differences between that political party and its opposition. So there's a lot of what we call external difference. Now there are clear Republican-Democrat divides, and don't just take my word for it. Take the word of everyone. 79% of Americans see the political parties as fundamentally different. They see Democrats as liberal and left-leaning, Republicans as conservative and right-leaning. And party platforms and activists reflect this difference in their conduct and how they, what they're campaigning for and what they're pushing for. Now, we are almost out of time. So I'm going to stop this video and we'll pick up in what I believe will be our last video.